Well, hello, everyone. My name is Lon Henderson. I've been doing inspections, home inspector in Colorado for 23 years, and also teach home inspection at the Boulder School, InterNACHI headquarters in Boulder. So we're going to jump into our presentation here. A couple of things, just, we're I realize everybody's here just to get credits and mostly, but we'll try to keep it interesting, hopefully learn a few things along the way, hopefully have a little fun here with it. Decks are definitely a serious thing. On that first slide, which hopefully everyone can see, a couple of things. InterNACHI estimates that there are about 45 million decks, and based on statistics available in other places, about 40% of them are considered completely safe. About 90% of deck collapses occur as a result of just pulling away from the house. So the deck ledger board, the board that attaches the deck to the house, comes loose and the deck just pulls away from the house. If the deck's 2 feet off the ground, not too big a deal, just a little excitement. When it's 10 feet off the ground, then you can have a different outcome. So for us as home inspectors, if there's any part of a deck inspection you want to get right, it's that deck, that ledger board attachment to the house. It is arguably the single biggest deal with decks and our inspection. Just over and over and over, every time you hear a story about somebody getting badly hurt or killed with something going wrong with the deck, every time it's, oh, the deck came loose from the house. Had some in Brazil, was it last year, 15 people killed or something, and deck collapse. And just it happens a lot everywhere, and a lot of it, of course, is in the United States. You can see at the bottom of that slide, Consumer Product Safety Commission estimates that more than 6,000 people are injured each year in incidents involving structural failure of a deck. That's crazy, but then it's a country of 330 million people, so I guess it's not too surprising. Regarding the tools at the top of the, whoops, let me back up here. At the top of the slide here, flashlight, measuring tape, ladder, level, plumb bob, probing tool, hammer. 99% of the time, the only tool I'll use is a probing tool, and which is, in my case, my big flathead screwdriver. Occasionally you need a flashlight, particularly a deck that's low to the ground, and so it's pretty dark underneath it, and so I'll use a flashlight there. Occasionally a measuring tape. Haven't used too many ladders on decks, but sometimes you have to get the ladder to, particularly a deck that's 10 feet or more off the ground, to get a close look at what's going on with the ledger or some other attachments, maybe the ladder levels, checking for plumb posts or columns or level across the top of the deck. I gotta say, I've never used a plumb bob ever, and I don't go tapping on decks with a hammer at all either. The moisture meter, magnet calculator, yeah, maybe. I've never even, I don't think I've even put my moisture meter on a deck. I can conceive of some circumstances where you would, but usually when you see situations where it's looking wet, you usually have some rock associated with that, and it's the rock that is instantly becomes the biggest concern there in my experience. So, so a couple of things here. About the whoops, back up here. Now I keep hitting the wrong thing. So it says inspect from the bottom. The you know, that's great advice. Obviously, sometimes you're walking across the deck just to get to the bottom. But generally, we start at the bottom and look underneath, check ledger board, check attachments, and columns. Look for wood rot, that sort of thing. Kind of should go without saying, but if you see something horrible there, well, pretty much the inspection's over at that point. You take your photos, document it. That goes in your report, and that's your what you're talking about. This illustration here shows load distribution on a deck. Just this is something that in a report you'd never be talking about, or rarely you would talk about, I guess. But it's information that I like to say goes into your well of knowledge. Just kind of a fundamental understanding about things that we do in general, but in this case, decks. Understanding some of the dynamics of loads on decks. So the IRC has tables for decks up to 10 pounds per square foot with 40 pounds per square foot of live load. Most decks are a little overbuilt, so they tend to hold more than 40 to 60 pounds of load. And the 2021 IRC made some big changes in the deck portion of it. And so now it shows snow loads up to 70 PSF. So give you a rough idea, at the bottom of that slide, you can see a 40 PSF live load is equivalent to about a 200-pound person standing on every 2.5 by 2 foot area of the deck. So that'd be a fairly crowded deck. And but that's the kind of load that we want the deck to withstand. You got a 20 by 20 deck, and you got 10, 12 teenagers out there dancing or something. We want the deck to hold them, even if it's only a foot off the ground, but definitely if it's 10 feet off the ground. So it's kind of just having that basic understanding of this, I think, helps kind of round out some of the reasons why we want to, why understanding decks and why it's a big deal is important. Obviously, hot tubs can be very heavy, full of water, and framing should support 100 pounds per square foot. Hot tubs distribute that weight over a broad area, so it may not necessarily or rarely actually come to a full 100 pounds per square foot. But again, over-engineered is considered a better deal safety-wise, and more important for keeping the whole thing safe. So, in general, one of these things about decks, you get on a deck, and if it feels like you're walking on jelly, right off, you're going to go, I think we have an issue here. Stepping out on a deck with a hot tub that feels unstable, definitely going to be pretty critical of what you see with the framing when you get underneath that thing, or hopefully you were underneath it before you even walked on it. So some of the basics here. Footings. So as it says, exterior deck footings should be installed at least 12 inches below the basically the undisturbed ground. So many times in construction you have the soil that was never disturbed at construction, and maybe you have some loose fill that went on top. Of course, in many cases It's all loose fill because that's the way they were leveling out the pad where the house is. And, you know, for our purposes, we rarely know this stuff. So again, this is one of these things that kind of goes into your well of knowledge of how these things go together. So in general, we would like that footing, concrete pier in this case, in our illustration, going to solid, undisturbed, sometimes bedrock, but undisturbed soil that is the most solid, most likely to stay where it is. But we can't really know if it did that. We're just going to observe those. Is our deck still where it looks like it should have been, where it was when they built it? Is our column still vertical? Or is the surface of our deck still level? Or maybe they put a little quarter-inch per foot of fall on it or something just to drain it a little better or something. But does it have a good footing on it? Then this is another one of these things that we're rarely going to be able to actually see if the footing is adhering to the what we call the 7-foot rule, which is from the base of the footing to where let's say we're on a slope and side of a slope, and so they put a pier down to anchor the column that they're putting in, and the base of that column should be no closer than 7 feet to the surface of the slope of our hillside here. As you can see in the illustration, we got that 7-foot mark going to where it daylights, in air quotes here. Now, again, pretty hard for us to know whether it really does that. And, you know, sometimes on a really steep hill here, you're looking at that going, well, did they put a 20-foot pier down here to get that 7-foot rule before we get to daylight on the side? You're thinking probably not, but you can't know. So is it working? Is what we see working? The other thing is our illustration here shows the wood column, wood post being buried in the soil. One thing to keep in mind about pressure treated lumber is not all pressure treated lumber is equal. There's pressure treated lumber that is rated for ground contact. And as you can see, it says classified UC4A or UC4B. Once again, as a home inspector, pretty hard to know whether they use the correct type of pressure treated lumber, pressure treated with preservative lumber for that use. So we're going to be looking to see if we see evidence that it's just not working. That probe the base here, and we'll get more into probing for rot here in a few minutes. But you know, you probe the base there. Is it any evidence of decay, wood rot, wood pests, any of that sort of thing? The thing with also, as you know, just having soil to wood contact is a start for getting wood pests, wood rot, all those things started. So even if you, you know, it looks like pressure treated lumber, I would still note in my report that I have earth to wood contact, and this is a condition that should be monitored. You know, my clients just say, you know, you monitor it by, you know, maybe once a year or every other year, you come out here and you just, you know, take a big screwdriver or something and stab around the base of the post here and see if you got something developing there that would weaken the post, the column here. And then, you know, I can't say I see this on decks that are more than a few feet off the ground. but certainly see it on decks that are low to grade, where they use these little footers here. You buy them at Home Depot, and they just sit on the surface of the ground, have a 4x4 post in them, and typically, not going to be allowed, which brings me to something else that, know your area, know what your local city, municipality, county inspectors, that sort of thing, authority having jurisdiction will allow. For instance, certainly here in Colorado, but this is true for many states and places, different inspectors will allow different things. And, for a deck that is 2 feet off the ground, some inspectors around here, particularly in some rural areas, may allow this. But other inspectors, particularly in the big cities, they're far less likely to allow this. They want a pier that's in the ground, stable in the ground, and the column secured to that pier so that things just can't easily move around. So here we have an example of a pier that would be in the ground, and then we have an anchor that is secured, bolted into the pier, and then we have our column that sits in that anchor and is secured to that with approved fasteners, so that this column can't move side to side, slide around, go anywhere. So here is obviously a real life one where we have the column that's been drilled into the ground some and augered in. Used a 12-inch round form here, poured the concrete on it, put their anchor on it. But as you can see, it's not centered on the top of the pier. So this becomes kind of a judgment call for your local inspectors, your city inspectors, your county inspectors, or whatever. Certainly, some will not allow this. They want this column here to be fully bearing on the pier. And by the way, you see the little marks here in the side of the column. That is an indication of pressure treating, because they roll these wood members through a form that makes these indentions here, and then when they pressure treat them with the preservative, they get better penetration of the preservative into the wood through these little indentions here that they have. So that's a clue if you're not completely sure that you're likely looking at a pressure treated wood member. So knowing what your local inspectors allow gives you some guidance on what conclusion you come to when you see a situation like this, where the column isn't fully bearing on the pier underneath. Now, sometimes, and I don't have a photo of this, but I've seen these things hanging halfway off. Pretty rare that you're going to have a local inspector who's okay with hanging half off the pier. If it's like this one where you got just the corner sticking out over the edge of the pier, around here, certainly most of the city inspectors will allow that. But know what your local authorities having jurisdiction allow there for that. And then we have just goofiness where they came in, slid a board on the dirt here, just stuck a 2x4 in here that's already splitting to boot, not even bearing on the board here. So sometimes you look at this and go, well, what are they trying to do? Well, in this case, it does look they're trying to stabilize this corner here. So maybe we have an issue here with this not being a good assembly, shall we say, and something that we would call out. And by the way, over here on the left, you see out of plumb, that rule of thumb is 1 inch out of plumb over an 8-foot height. So you can, do the math on this. If it's 4-foot column, a 1/2 inch out of plumb would be considered unstable or potentially unstable. A 2-foot column that's a 1/4 inch out of plumb would conceivably be considered unstable. So the something like this, it's a call out. Write that one up. Over here, again, they put a pier in, but then they got this goofy sort of, they nailed a 2x4 to another 2x4, and then it broke off at the knot here. And then they added this 1x10 in over here, or 2x10 in over here but what are they trying to do? Okay, we got a little bit of a, some sort of girder here, looks like a couple of 2x6s put together, but our bearing wall is right over here. Maybe they're not really, maybe this isn't really doing anything. So you can, sometimes you have a bit of a judgment call on it, that maybe this is some sort of supplemental support or temporary support that was never really intended to be the final support. And you, make a call on whether it's really something that is contributing to the load bearing of the deck, or it's just something that, somebody added for some unknown reason that doesn't really materially contribute to the overall stability and function of the deck. But if you determine that it is something that is needed, well, then this is a non-typical or non-standard column. It's not anchored top or it's not anchored at the bottom for sure. And then in that case, you would definitely call it out. So there's cases where instances like this where you see something that has a do-it-yourselfer look to it, or temporary look to it, or something, and you got these blocks over here that aren't bearing anything. They may be used at time of construction for some purpose, but they're clearly not doing anything, so you don't have anything there. You got debris out here that might be something that attracts termites or wood boring pests. So you might have a call out about something connected with that. But as far as the column itself, determining if you think it's actually got some useful function or not goes toward deciding if it's something that's a defect that needs to be remedied, or it's just an observation. So IRC doesn't say a whole lot about post sizing, but just in general, and you've probably seen it, if you got a 10-foot 4x4 column or post, they'll often warp, twist, sometimes split badly too, even if they are treated lumber. And and obviously if their ends are below grade, or they can particularly if they're splitting, they can split and open up the heart of the column, and now wood rot, termites, even wood boring pests can get into that wood and bypass the preservative that is maybe even a 1/4 inch thick on the exterior of the board, depending on the quality and level of pressure treating on it. So deck posts should be basically 6x6 posts or columns. Again, it's depending on how your local city inspectors are interpreting this, but generally you get about 4 feet. We want to see 6x6s, and they can be no higher than 12 feet are 14 feet is generally acceptable if they're cross brace. And then the American Wood Council in their deck prescriptions say 6x6 period, any size deck or any height deck, regardless, it's sitting 2 feet off the ground or 10 feet off the ground, or in this case, 14 feet off the ground. And they don't even care if you come in with a really big post like an 8x8, they still say maximum height 14 feet. So if you're in, my observations and experience is pretty unusual to run into decks that are being supported just straight up more than 14 feet off the ground. But, then it falls into, was it permitted? Did the local city inspectors sign off on this? And in some cases, they'll want to see steel columns out here or something if it's over 14 feet. So now,
hey, Lon.
Yes.
Can I interrupt you real fast?
Sure can.
I've got 2 questions I'd like to make sure we're addressed.
You bet.
The first one from Martin Betts is, how deep do the piers need to be?
Well, again, it kind of depends on where your solid soil is, but typically at least 12 inches below grade, but typically 12 inches into that stable soil or to bedrock. So it depends on the situation, on what you're looking at. If you got 5 feet of loose fill down to stable soil, engineer, if this is a permitted deck, the engineer may well say, you know what, I want to drill down to the stable soil or the bedrock down there, particularly for a really big deck. So it's individual, so to speak.
Okay. Another question. If the pier footing is below grade area, are we required to dig down to see depth?
No, you are not.
No.
Great question. No.
And I believe that's,
look, sometimes I'll take my, my big screwdriver that's 8-9 inches of shank on it and stab it into the soil next to a pier just to see if it's at least that long down the side of it. Because I may have a suspicion that they didn't really put a good footer under this column. And I'll do this with suspicious foundations too, for that matter. And stick that big screwdriver down the side of it to see if it's at least that deep. But no, you are not required to dig down at all.
so then someone is then asking, if you're not required to dig, is there any sort of standard procedure to assume, to confirm that there's 12 inches solid down there?
There's nothing to confirm it. So then now we do get into assumption. And so it's based on what do we see going on with our deck. Look, if it's a 10-year-old deck and it's, columns are vertical, they're plumb, no evidence of settling, you kind of go, hey, it's working, and call it good and go to what the next thing you're looking for on that deck. But yeah, that's a great question also. But yeah, there's no really good way for us to confirm the footings, the piers, how they're constructed, without just actually digging them up.
Okay. And then the last question for this particular part of the presentation is, what deck height is acceptable on a 4x4 in your opinion?
I wouldn't go above 4 feet. Yeah.
You wouldn't do it?
In the old days, sure. Heck, in fact, if I turn the camera out my window here, you would see my 10-foot deck has 4x4 posts. But that was done 20-something years ago. And it was allowed then. It's worked great. My deck is nice and stable, but under today's guidelines, we would never, ever do that.
Okay, so no 4x4s.
No 4x4s normally. And if you follow the American Wood Council's recommendation, you start with a 6x6, period. That's the post or column you start with. And so you start with a pressure treated 6x6 column.
All right. Well, thank you very much for answering those questions.
Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So moving on to wood rock. So we're talking about the probes. So, look, the most common form of decay is obviously wood rot, which is typically fungus or fungi growing in the wood. So, as you guys no doubt know, the only part of the fungus that you ever see on the surface of ground, wood, whatever, is the sporing body of it, and hiding underneath that is what we call the mycelium, which is kind of, think of like roots of the fungus, and that mycelium spreads through wood, and it's eating the cellulose. And I'm oversimplifying this, obviously, but it's eating the cellulose of the wood, which weakens the wood, and over time can weaken it enough that now things start to break, fail, lose integrity, structural integrity. And so one of the things, we definitely can see some visual clues to that, which we'll get to in a moment, but something you can do, a couple of things you can do: tap with a hammer if you want to do that. And solid wood has a ding to it, and rotted wood has a thud to it, typically. Personally, I like next to never do that. I like using the probe, and so far in 23 years of doing this, poking holes in a lot of rotted wood, I've never had anyone call me up and go, "You poked a hole in my rotted wood." So, and if I ever get that call, I'll say, "Yeah, I found some rotted wood, needs to be fixed." But I take my big screwdriver and stab suspicious places, and sometimes in places that I'm just not sure of, just hitting them, not hard enough to try to drive it into solid wood, but certainly firm enough that if it's rotted, I'm going to easily dig that into that big flathead screwdriver into it. So here in our illustrations, we see a couple of, it shows it splitting it there, but he's kind of using a different type of probe. And I never stabbed with a probe and split the wood like that. So I'm not a big, personally, I'm not a big fan of this individual illustration here. If I was making this illustration, we'd see more of the probe just making a tiny little dent in the solid wood. And then when it goes into rotted wood, it just sticks into it. Our illustration here on the right, where we probe around the base of any wood that's down in the dirt kind of thing, you stab along there and just see if it's solid. And if you find some wood rot or pest invasion, your probe, in my case screwdriver, typically buries up in it. Here you go, there's my screwdriver. And so this is obviously a wood plank. It's been finished with maybe paint, but I think it was a deck finishing material. Had several layers of it apparently, because you can see where one layer's peeled off. But interestingly about this is it's really common to get wood rot on these end boards, because that where the screws go in or nails go in, it kind of looks like a drywall screw right there, doesn't it? Which would not be allowed, but that's a separate conversation for later. And then they have a nail gun nail here, because you can see the little indentation on it from the clip on the nail gun. So is that an approved nail? Probably so, because it didn't rust. It's not rusting, so chances are it was galvanized or something. But these create openings in the surface of the plank and makes a great place for water to catch in there, and then for fungus to get started growing and start rotting out that end there. So this is a very common little area of wood rot that we see over and over. And then looking down here onto the joist, see that little white there? High likelihood that's the sporing bodies of some fungus that's in the joist underneath there. So another example here, you can see how this cross piece here, it's got a little warping there that's sort of almost like a roll in the surface of it. That's a, ding, 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 a clue that maybe we're looking at some wood rot there. Sure enough, my screwdriver just disappears into that board, like pushing it into styrofoam. So but the clue that I was going to see that was that roll in the surface of the board here that, hey, it didn't come out of the mill that way. So that the wood rot underneath there has swollen that up. New paint's hiding a lot of stuff here. We'll have more conversations about attachments, but that one probably is not going to be an approved attachment either. And then look down here. We have some mushrooms sticking out on the bottom. Woohoo. So this, our ledger board here now is rot there. Now we have some mushrooms sticking out here. You start putting these two clues together, and it doesn't take, it's a short run to, oh, we got a rotted ledger board here. Nail pot there and stuff. So some other more discussions about nailing things in a minute. So back to that little white that we saw in the earlier slide. So early stage wood rot, this is very common, where you just have that, it almost looked like somebody kind of splashed some sort of goofy paint on there or something. And if you probe this, it's often pretty solid. It's not like styrofoam at all here. But that white is telling us we have fungus growing in there. This is starting to, these are the sporing bodies on the surface of the wood. Over here, that green is almost certainly algae. Algae is not really considered destructive to wood, but it does tell us that the wood's wet enough that it can promote algae growing on it. And now we see the white here again, which is the sporing bodies of wood rot, mold, or fungus growing inside these planks, in this case, the walking planks on the surface of the deck. So, and again, hit this with a probe, not much happens, it's not rotted out. So while this deck isn't structurally failing yet, clearly the fuse on this time bomb is burning, clock is ticking, whatever analogy you want to use. So here again, another example showing these sporing bodies growing, and for the purposes of a photograph and a report, pointing them out and labeling it, saying, here, hey, here's what I'm seeing, here's my concern, that this deck's got rot in it and it's going to conceivably fail soon. Most of New York typically has higher humidities than I see in Colorado. So this process for you guys may well move quicker than I typically see it in Colorado. So for what we see in this photograph here, I would see a deck go from this to complete failure in 5 to 6 years. That clock may be much shorter for you guys, since you tend to have a higher humidity than we see here in Colorado. So having some familiarity with this sort of thing, whether you talk to, if you haven't already, seen in your own experience what it is, talk to some contractors who work with this and get some feel from them on it too, on how that works. So here again, got the sporing bodies, got a little algae growing in there too on that. You know, we talked about earlier moisture meter. You know, yeah, if I put a moisture meter on this or the previous slide or the this one right here, you know, man, I'm going to pin the moisture meter, but I don't even have to do that. I already have my issues with what I can see here with the fungus growing in it. So I don't need to put a moisture meter on it, but you can do that if you like, just for, you know, I don't know, add extra information, your own information or whatever. So here we're seeing it moving down the truss, the joist in this case. And, you know, I don't know that I have a photograph of me stabbing this one, but chances I don't even have to stick my probe into this particular board to go, okay, now we got some wood rot that has moved considerably past our earlier slides, and we're in mid-stage rot here. Now it's time to start getting the bids for doing some repairs on these decks. And by the way, depending on how the deck's put together, but frequently, you know, if you just got a couple of rotted boards like this, rotted joists, guy can come in, a deck guy, contractor can come in and get these out and slide in some new ones without tearing the whole deck off. Ledger board replacement, different story. Our earlier slide with the ledger board showing rot, yeah, rotted ledger board, that's a big problem. That is nearly always a tear off in a big job. So here you go. So now from that white looking like splashed on paint sort of thing, now we see what it turns into after a couple of years. That white thin sporing body now has depth to it and texture to it, as now they're starting to grow thicker and become more recognizable as sort of that traditional wood rot look. And so here, this is the kind of thing you hit that with your probe, and almost certainly you're going to go into the wood in these thicker, nastier little areas here. So certainly that's old paint hanging down here. Somebody painted it in the past and paint's peeling off. So that's, you know, just a cosmetic observation. Here's our concern with the wood rot here, telling us once again, yeah, the end is in sight now. Here you go. So again, similar to what we just saw in the previous slide, you can see how easily my screwdriver just disappears into that wood member there. If I stabbed it down here, same effect. This is, you know, time for some repair here. Back on top, we see now from our first slide where we just had a little end damage on the butt joints of these planks. Now we see it spreading through the plank and literally arguably unsafe, that if you somehow put your full weight on this area here, it just might go through. And so once again, now we're going to be writing up extensive wood rot in the surface of the deck or in the deck planking, and repair is needed. Of course, when you got vegetables trying to grow, that's also a big clue that maybe we've got a problem here. Vegetables. Here you go from the underside. Kind of interesting here. They added some plywood support through here or something, and you can see we got extensive wood rot throughout this area here. You can see the underside of the synthetic planking here, but did something here. You know, this piece of plywood here in itself might not be such a big deal, but it's spread into the joist. And so, you know, that's going to be a call out for us that we have wood rot in the framing of our deck, and we need repair done. This is a little different version on the sporing bodies. You see how they're following the grain of the wood there, how the mycelium has followed the grain, and now when it hits the surface, it sends out the sporing bodies on the surface of the wood here, and then it's all up through the joist because we can see it surfacing out in here too. Those are those clues. Wood rot. Got a problem? Let's write it up. And then, of course,
I've got some questions that might be good to interject right here. There's two that are kind of related. The first one is, do you comment on painted decks? And then the second related question is, does paint promote rot?
Wow, great. I don't particularly comment on painted decks unless the paint is peeling in bad condition or poor condition. And I definitely make a comment on that. But if the paint is in good condition, then, don't really say much about it. I think it could be, there's two arguments on the painting. Oh, paint protects the deck, but also paint can trap moisture in the deck. The paint, clearly the permeability of paint is far lower than wood. So it's just simply not going to breathe easily. So it can definitely trap moisture in the wood. And so unless that wood, the planking, the framing, everything is, completely sealed with a good coat of paint, water's going to get in there, get trapped. So I do see a lot of wood rot associated with painted decks.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that. My dog went after the cat. And then I'm going to save the question about pier to column post for a little later, Tamara. What do you call it when you write this up in your report? Do you call it organic growth? Do you call it fungus? Do you call it fruiting bodies?
I call this wood rot. It's, when we get into things like black mold, we typically call that, mold-like substance. Some guys will call it organic substance, something like that. But for this, I see a mushroom there, no confusion. I see that early sporing bodies, that almost white splash on there. I'm calling it out as wood rot. On a deck, anywhere, when you have wood, actual rot, that is affecting the structure or ultimately affecting the structural integrity of the place. And I'm calling it out as wood rot. So no, I'm not sort of using some of the less strong, I guess, terms like, oh, we have organic growth, visible or yellow organic growth protruding from the side of the joist. I don't say that. I say mushrooms growing out of the framing indicates wood rot, which will or is weakening the framing or the joists or whatever I'm looking at or describing. So I treat it like it's a big deal. If that helps.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
No more questions.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So, and like here, look, mushrooms, that's a no-brainer. Mushrooms don't grow, they don't grow on the surface of just stuff they can't eat. So you see mushrooms growing there, it's already deeply invaded this. You can probe, but you don't really need to. You've seen all you need to here. This is a big call out here. Write that up. And you got mushrooms sticking out. Here, ditto, mushrooms sticking out. Actually, this is more of a blow up of that earlier photograph where we had my probe up here in the corner. Got mushrooms sticking out. That's fungus. That's fungal rot, however you want to put it. You see mushrooms it's a no-brainer. Call it out. Here, kind of, I've mentioned it earlier, but here we see some lichen or fungus on the surface of wood or algae. I mean, lichen and algae on the surface of the wood, and then you see the white veins running there. That is the fungal bodies or the sporing bodies of fungus growing through there. So as mentioned earlier, I said it about algae isn't particularly destructive. Lichen's not particularly destructive either, but algae and lichen indicate that we have high moisture content, which indicates that this is going to be a great place for fungus to grow, and high likelihood that fungus will be there associated with lichen or algae, even though lichen and algae themselves aren't that intrusive or destructive. And so the green being the clue that it's algae, and then lichen can be multiple colors, you know, orange, yellow, red. You see different colors in lichen. And but that green is your first clue. I may find some wood rot here if I start, you know, probing or just looking closer. And sure enough, we see it here where it's getting started. Any last questions on the fungus stuff before I move on to the next part here?
We don't have any more unless anyone wants to type it up in the Q&A box right now. I'll be watching for it. We did have one question related to the size of the pier compared to column post, because you did say that you could use 6x6 or 8x8s even.
Yeah, great point. There's there's not some exact prescriptions for doing that, but typically the entire base of the column should be supported on the pier. So a 6x6 a column is almost certainly going to be on a pier that's at least 12 inches across on it for it to fully bear on that column. So you wouldn't have a post hole digger digs about a 5-inch hole straight down. Well, that ain't going to cut it for a 6x6 column, and barely cuts it for a before, but arguably wouldn't even cut it for a 4x4, but definitely not a 6x6 column, which of course is 5.5 by 5.5, but still is not going to cut it for that.
Okay, thank you. That let's see. Last question here then. For the base of the, I think he means column, can you use the new foam, or does it have to be concrete?
Oh, I have never seen anybody using structural foam for that. That's a great question. Wow. Arguably, you could use, come in with some 15 or 20 pound foam. Yeah, that's pretty good stuff. Arguably, that could work. I would say you'd have to get the okay from your local inspector on whether that's something they would allow. One thing about foam, it typically does not like being exposed to sunlight and the elements. It's the kind of thing that does best, holds up best when it's not exposed to UV and the air. So there may be some limitations with using it for that. So that's a great question. Man, I always love doing this. Somebody always has a great question. That's a good one. Not sure what yeah, I would talk to my local inspector, hey, what if I use.
And you mean code inspector when you say that?
Yeah, code inspector, exactly. So it's yeah, that's a good one. I can't think of anything in the IRC that addresses that. That's a good one.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can get more information on foam versus concrete, but for now, that is all the questions.
Cool. So Kind of moving on to the next section here, and by the way, at the bottom of the hour here, we'll take a break. But the so we have a low to grade deck here. 12 inches minimum space there to have good air movement through there. No possibility of soil contact with the girders or the beams or anything. In the real world, you guys see it too. They're literally sitting in the dirt. Well, sitting in the dirt is wrong. So if you've got the beams sitting in the dirt, it's a call out. Now, as you guys know, so much of this stuff, nobody's going to do anything about it. That's not our concern. We're still going to take our photos, say we don't want this earth to wood contact here. But 12 inches clearance is kind of the minimum standard. If I see it, 3 inches, I'm not going, oh, this is, not 12 inches, this needs to be fixed. I never say that. I just look, do I see a problem here? Is this something going on that this is causing the problem, having the poor clearance? And if I don't see it, I just move on. In this illustration, so it shows a column down in the soil. I see a lot of that where our wood columns are buried in the soil, and I probe them. Sometimes even dig, an inch or two down with into my screwdriver, and I only mean an inch or two, just to see if I got some wood rot going there in addition to just probing it. But and I'll sometimes stab my probe down, my screwdriver down here, just to see if the pier is just hiding right under the surface here. I don't like to see columns sitting in the dirt, even if they are pressure treated. That's just begging for trouble to start. And certainly around here, and I bet it's going to be true for most of the areas where you guys are, your local city inspectors, code inspectors, they're not going to want to see this. They want to see the surface of that pier up here, like at least an inch above the grade, and the column sitting on top of that, above the dirt, where there's just no or less opportunity for moisture from the soil to get whipped right into the wood, and for obviously makes it a little more difficult for wood-borne insects and pests to start digging into that wood there. So a couple of things. One thing, the 2021 IRC, one of the big changes was notching posts. And under no circumstances can a 4x4 column be notched any longer in the 2021 IRC. Guys, you all know, guys and gals, you all know we're not code inspectors, but obviously so much of what we do overlaps with what code is. So at least having some knowledge of what code is is saying, particularly with big things, is something that is just part of what we do, even if we don't directly reference code. So for decks 2021 and forward, assuming that your municipality, your location adopted the 2021 IRC as soon as it came out, then you're not going to, and anything being built new, you're not going to see or want to see a notched 4x4 column. However, 6x6s can be notched. So another reason to have 6x6 columns instead of 4x4s is gives you a bigger column and more flexibility, the builder more flexibility in supporting the beams, girders, or whatever on there. So on our left here, we show a beam that's just bolted into a column. So the load bearing, which is also a big thing in the 2021 IRC deck change, we want that load to be bearing straight through our column. When these are bolted through on the side like this, now it's relying on the shear strength of that lag or bolt through there to support the deck up here. And so really, it doesn't hardly matter what our column is. It matters how strong our lags are here and how well our wood beam here is stable on the end. Is it going to split out or something? This is something that even in the past was poor practice, and after 2021, strictly not allowed. I see this on older decks constantly, and it's just, is it working or not? If it is, I'll write it up as not constructed the best practice, but functioning. Sometimes depending on exactly what it is, I like the term performing but not conforming. Things like that with decks, we actually say a lot. Over here, we have our 6x6 column notched to to take the beam in, and then lagged in or bolted through with 1/2-inch bolts with washers. And so this would be like, let's say, a 2x8 or 2x10 beam here, depending on the size of the deck, probably 2x10 minimum for most decks. Bearing here on the notch, so our load goes straight through the column here. So this is the kind of thing that now going forward with the code changes on newer decks we're looking at, this is something we'll be looking for to make sure they did this correctly. And over here in our actual photograph, and by the way, this is a deck that was built this year. Beautiful. They did it like they were supposed to here. And now instead of using bolts, they use approved brackets to secure our beam here, or rim joist in this case, our rim joist into the 6x6 column here. And this was a permitted deck, by the way. So instead of the bolts, we're still using brackets approved and securing this together. So this is a nicely put together with our load going straight through the column. A nice job here on that column and rim joist there. Here, not so good. Several things wrong. First of all, back to what we were talking about, we're relying on the shear strength of these bolts here. Then they countersunk them, so they're not even using the full thickness of our joist here for support. So countersunk, holding, bearing the shear strength, and you can see how our load has to go through our bolt, then get to the column and go through. It's offset under the new guidelines. They don't want to see that. They want that load to go straight through. So in this case, they should have sandwiched this in to the corner here, bolting through on all sides, and getting their load bearing distributed over more steel, so to speak, and never countersinking their lags or bolts into this. So this was never a best practice and wouldn't be allowed under today's code. So again, sitting on top is ideal. And then in this case, on our diagram illustration on the right here, so we have joists or beams that are breaking in between our supports here, and of course, the illustration doesn't really show properly supporting the supports, but that's not the part we're looking at here. This is the part we're looking at here. Most of the time, we want our columns underneath this break here, or this where we are overlapping these together. However, understand that if the overlap is broad enough here, it can still be allowed, but that typically takes an engineer to prescribe that overlap as and the amount of fasteners and the type of fastener, putting it together so that the overlap, if the overlap is not going to be bearing directly on a column there. So butt joints, as it says, typically must be bearing on posts, but they can be engineered to do this out in space. But so for us as inspectors, you know, how do we know it was done with an engineer? Well, first of all, you can nearly bet it wasn't. So because that's just not the way decks are typically put together. So now is it working? If we see this, you know, starting to displace through here, getting some you know, pivoting on these fasteners through here, bolts, whatever they used here, and we're going, oh, maybe it's not working. If it looks nice and secure, our joint here is nice and straight, hasn't started turning into kind of a V notch there or anything, and it's ditto for the one on the outside, if we can see them both. And we go, okay, it's working, you know, nothing to see here, move on. So it's a little bit of a judgment call. You can make a comment, as I said earlier, about not being a best practice, but it's working, or performing but not conforming. But you know, it's part of our assessment is, does it look like it's doing its job? If it was a brand new construction, I'd be far more critical of it. If I'm looking at something that's 5+ years old, now I'm going, okay, it's working. I'm going to make a comment that wasn't the best practice, or doesn't appear to be a best practice, but it's still performing. And, you know, the notching stuff is kind of typical for other things, and you know, that we see in framing members inside the house. Those rules, nearly all those rules there apply to decks. You know, among and, you know, keep in mind when it talks about tension and compression faces, tension is the top of the joist and compression is the bottom of the joist. Notches are not permitted in the middle third of the spans, because that can break that tension line across the top and weaken the joist. And then of course, what it says here, notches are not permitted in the middle third of spans or on the tension face of members that are greater than 3.5 inches thick. So giving you some diagrams there on that. You know, in general, if you see notches anywhere out in the middle third, you know, it better be a pretty shallow notch, but typically you're just going to call out notches in general. Again, a little more about notches here, another diagram. So end notches are really popular, generally speaking, because they're trying to fit it onto a joist, or I mean the beam, or the or something that they're supporting out on the edge, something like that. Notches there typically don't contribute to the overall weakness of the joist. So in notches rarely give us concerns unless they're really deep. So they typically should not be more than 1/4 of the depth of our, you know, like 2x6. We'd be talking, you know, no more than 1.5 inches deep on that notch, for instance. And once again, no notches in the middle third. And then I love this one here, because you see this one violated. No holes within 2 inches of the top or bottom edge. So, you know, you'll see holes drilled along the edge to run some wiring through there, or, maybe they ran a water line through to stick a water bib out on the edge of the deck or something. And those holes should be in the middle of the joist and not within 2 inches of the top or bottom. So, and this goes true for our lags or attachments, particularly for ledger boards, where they should not be within 2 inches of the edge. Man, see that one violated a lot. Once again, for my way I do it, I call that out is, again, not a best practice. Lags too close to the edge of the ledger board. The ledger board is working, but not put together the way it was supposed to be. So prior to 2021, you see here, the old rule of thumb roughly was on center spacing of ledger fasteners in inches, 100 divided by joist length in feet. So, let's say we have a 12-foot joist, divide that into 100. We need 8 1/2 inch lag screws or bolts in that 12-inch, it says joist, but ledger more aptly. And typically we stagger them instead of putting them in a straight line, which is not considered best practice either. But under the new 2021 IRC, they literally give us a graph, a table there that tells us now how to exactly do this. It's kind of interesting. Look at this. For 1/2 inch lag screws, it's a different number or a spacing distance than it is bolts. So for instance, assuming our 40 PSF live load on our example here, we have a 10-foot long, calling it a joist, but we're talking about something like a ledger board, really. We would have them 18 inches on center. So 18 inches apart, basically, if it's the screw, but if it's the bolt, you can go out to 34 inches. Once again, for us, we often don't know whether we're looking at the ends of screws or lags. And I don't know, hopefully you can see me on the screen. I got, a lag and a bolt here. Kayla, can you see this? Kayla's not here right now. So I'll find out here in a minute. But, when you look at the ends, there's not really a big difference there. So for our purposes, what do we think? If I see them 34 inches apart, I'm going to think, wow, that's quite a bit there. I'm wondering if this was really done right. I might say, yeah, we need a contractor to double check this and make sure it was done right, because that is a long ways apart. Certainly not normally what we used to see for that. Here's a lag or bolt too close to the edge, but overall we're looking pretty good here. We got it flashed into the wall, or they used nails on their joist hangers here. They're not little rust on them, but they're not failing. They're not popping. Looking, and they attached it directly to the framing, or at least the sheathing underneath. Got a little gap there on that one that we might, if we're being hypercritical, we could comment on the joist isn't sitting in the bottom of the joist hangers. They typically shim that as a easy fix with steel shims, but not really a whole lot to really get too excited about on our installation here, even though they have this closer than 2 inches to the edge. So I'm going to make a comment that it's not the best practice. The ledger board attachments are too close to the edge, but it's working. Here, a little much better here. We're about almost exactly 2 inches from the edge. They got the washers on, so we're looking pretty good here. It's not sitting on top of the siding, so it's looking pretty good. Over here, we have a different attachment. So, the prescriptions in the IRC are for 1/2 inch lags and screws, but then they have a provision that talks about um, attachment fasteners that are approved by the manufacturer. And so here we see one. I think this is a strong tie. I can't remember for sure. And you see the little embossments on the end here, indicating that it's a not just a regular, some kind of 1/4 inch screw or something. They did break the surface of the ledger or the wood in this case on the ledger board. They broke the surface with it, which not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be just sitting flush on the surface. So now it's a little bit embedded in the wood. If I only see that on a couple, I'm not going to get too excited. If they did it on all of them, I'm probably going to be a little more critical and make a comment that they over tightened the attachments, breaking the surface of the wood. And if it looks like it's still secured and working, I'll probably say that, but not a best practice to break through on it. Here's another one that's more, it's they can't be countersunk. And while this is not a true, this isn't a countersunk either. It's just screwed in way too tight and broke through the surface here and really just buried up. You can't do that. It must be flush on the surface. Again, it's just one or two on a ledger. I'm not too excited about it, but if it's all of them, again, going to be more critical of that. And then here, wow, almost, but not quite. The nuts have to be fully threaded on the ends of these bolts sticking through. So they put some bolts in, they're the right size, they're 1/2 inch, that's all good and promising. But oops, they didn't have enough of the bolts sticking through to fully thread the nut on. So, and this was every single attachment on this ledger. So yeah, I'm writing that one up. Like, we not right. Need to figure something out here. Get a contractor out to figure something out. But potential of these conceivably working loose is, I don't know, but could be high. Not sure. This was a case where it's hard to tell exactly the age of the deck in the ledger, but looked like it was 4 or 5 years old. So it wasn't coming right off, although this one here looked like maybe it was backing off a little bit. And yeah, reach up and grab this. Yeah, okay, it didn't feel loose, but sure looked like it might not have been as tight as it was originally. So call it writing this one up is a bigger deal and needing some sort of correction on it. Then I see this one violated so often, it's almost like, automatic. They put the ledger board on top of siding. In this case, vinyl siding, for goodness sakes. Over here, it's composite siding. So, and yeah, I got a little, the lag is a little countersunk into the wood there, which is a different issue. But the big issue is it can't be on top of siding. Definitely not. let me come back to this one on the right here. It's not on top of they were smart here. They didn't attach this through to the vinyl siding. They put it up against the house, but instead of attaching it directly here, they have the ledger board supported on this column. Now, this was done quite a few years ago before the 2021 change, but nevertheless, they don't have it bearing correctly on this column. So you can see one's just almost a drywall screw there, and on the between here, I couldn't see anything. So I'm thinking they probably drywall screwed the ledger board onto this and then pushed it up against the house. So my problem here isn't with they attached the ledger board to the over the top of the vinyl siding to the house. My problem here is this is not good attachment for our load going straight through, bearing on the column. We're relying on the shear strength of a drywall screw, and maybe a couple here too, which isn't going to be good. So this one is not a good practice. Now it's only 2 feet off the ground, so at least it's not a huge safety issue, but still wrong. Still calling out this, but not worried about being attached to the house over the top of the vinyl siding. However, on our left photo, different story. Not vinyl, it's composite, but it's attached on top of the composite. You can't do that. And so that is going to be the call out. Even though the deck is not failing, it's still something I'm going to call out. It is not a best practice, not put together. And I don't use the code word in my reports, but this is a code violation. I'm going to say it's not built to industry practices or standards, best practice, any of those terms. And because it's on top of the siding, well, let's go. Well, this one's interesting too, because now we have stucco here. And so not only do they have the ledger on top of the stucco, which is again wrong, now we have a cantilever here for, in this case, I think it was a fireplace, but gas fireplace. So it wasn't a masonry fireplace with a lot of weight on it, but still. Then they attach the ledger board directly to the cantilever. Typically, cantilevers are not engineered for this extra weight on there. So the correct way of doing this is like this on our illustration here, is tying our ledger across here, making it a beam basically, that goes across to doubled up joists on the side here. So this becomes basically a header or beam, a beam or header, either term, used across here. And so it has no attachment to our cantilever here, and we don't have any weight bearing on this. But in our another example here, same thing. So they attach the ledger again to the cantilever. Typically not allowed. Now, in some cases, an engineer might have approved this for particular model of a house or something in a production area, and okay, fine, they got that approved with the city and stuff. For our purposes, we can't know that. So typically, I'm going to call out that typically decks cannot be attached to cantilevers, and this question of is it failing or not always comes up, and so I'm looking for evidences of stresses. Don't see it here, but I have seen them in some cases where you can clearly see that the weight of the deck on the ledge on the cantilever is starting to pull down on the cantilever, and and maybe you have cracked drywall even on the inside of the house, showing some of the stresses from the leverage of the cantilever being pulled down and then trying to lever up on the inside of the house and causing some issues. So, this again falls into one of those categories, at least for me, that, okay, not done right. Do I see it causing a problem? Obviously, one of the issues with this is that with no load on the deck, maybe it doesn't cause a problem. If you have people out here partying on the deck, and maybe it starts to cause a problem. Big snow loads up here, adding a lot of weight to it, conceivably might. And somebody trying to put a hot tub out on this might also be an issue. So in any event, still done incorrectly. They did flash it, so give them some kudos for that. They put their ledger over here directly to the framing, or at least the sheathing underneath, so good there. So we had a couple of things wrong, good over here, but wrong with the cantilever attachment. So yeah, go ahead, hit me with some questions here.
All right, so I'm going to infer, because there's not a lot of information on this, but when something happens and the ICC code changes and you find something that's functional but not working, would you consider that grandfathered in?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
If it was code at any time, and man, so many things in our business are like this. If it was code in the past, then it's grandfathered in. The only exception, and I'm trying to think here on something that would be one of those exceptions, it's probably in something in electrical, is something that code thought was okay, and now we found out that's not safe anymore. But man, I'm having trouble coming up with something that would be an illustration of that. But in general, yes, things are not required to be brought to current code unless some major work is done to it. So, for instance, about 7-8 years ago, I had sufficient wood rot in my own deck that I needed to replace it, and in replacing it now, it would have to be brought to current code for that replacement. So, but just going in and replacing a rotted joist isn't a major replacement. But if you got to, replace the ledger board, that's typically taking the whole deck off. And now the new code, again, depending on, your own city inspectors, but most places are going to say, okay, now we're going to kick in the new code on you since you're doing a major replacement or remodel to it.
Okay, fantastic. And on the image where you showed the deck was not attached to the siding, but they had slid a board between the siding, is that what was considered a freestanding deck?
Yeah, that is a freestanding deck. Exactly.
Okay. Is it acceptable to attach the lag bolts through hard coat stucco?
No.
No.
Never.
Easy. All right.
Never. Yeah.
Never, everyone, never.
Even if you somehow flash it in, you still cannot do that.
Okay. And I'm gonna again infer a little bit, because the question just says, would a bracket under the beam qualify, I'm assuming, as support?
Normally not. I can't think of an example where it would. I mean, there might be some, but it would have to be approved by the city inspector. For that would be a non-typical installation, and normally that would not be approved.
Okay, no way for an inspector to know that either. All right. A girder relying on shear strength, would you recommend additional support?
Yeah, kind of a Band-Aid fix, but can work is, just literally maybe adding something like a 2x6 or 2x4 to the side underneath it that is multiply attached, using multiple fasteners that are, not drywall screws, something that has some shear strength in it. Under that can sometimes, I've seen city guys allow that for special cases where, not excessive loads and stuff. So there are some, Band-Aid fixes that can be allowed. It just depends on the discretion of the, city inspector. And guys, we all know this. So much of this work is done without anybody ever inspecting it, at least around here. But, I talk to inspectors all over the country, Canada, who, it's not just us. These things, the decks are put on without any permit or inspection at all. But if inspectors are looking at it, then they'll sometimes make some special allowances for some Band-Aid fixes like that, or adjustments like that.
Excellent. Brian says, I keep seeing 1/4 and 3/8 diameter screws being used as ledger connections. Good, bad?
Okay. I will go to this right now then. It depends. It depends on if it's something that is approved by the manufacturer for that. For instance, right here is a, what is it called? A KBR bolt. And you can see maybe if I hold it up here, right,
I can see it.
Little embossments on the end of the bolt and stuff. This is an approved ledger attachment, even though it's, heck, I don't know, 3/16 of an inch shank on it. But it's, good tensile strength steel and approved for deck attachments. So there are some special attachments for that can work, versus the, 1/2-inch lags. And by the way, preferred galvanized, but, even steel ones are allowed, but galvanized is the best. And, one way when you're looking at this, when you're just walking around, if the head is 3/4 of an inch, I think you can see that, then you're looking at a 1/2-inch lag, bolt, and then you should have a washer under it every time. So like this bolt here has a washer under it, and we see washers under these too. So whether it's a bolt or a lag, a head, 1/2-inch diameter, you're going to have that 3/4 inch hex head on the top of it. Or not hex, but 6-sided. If you see something like that with in some of our photos we did with that little, 3/8 inch head on it, you're not looking at a 1/2 inch, just simple as that, and typically not approved. An exception to that is something, well, this screw here is actually approved for attaching joist hangers and metal things. It doesn't have the diameter to be a ledger board attachment, and it's hard to see in the photograph there, but you can see some embossments in the middle of it there, which this is I think this was a Strong Tie brand, and this one is, like I said, approved for joist hangers and things like that. But they have versions of this that are a little bigger, that are also approved for ledger board attachments. So you can see some things like that are manufacturer's approval for it. For us as home inspectors, there's a lot of brands out there, and it's hard to know them all. So sometimes you're not quite sure it's truly something approved. And, I think it's okay to write up that, unable to confirm that the fasteners used are approved for this use. Sometimes I'll take, as good a photograph as I can of the heads and things, and then literally try to, Google it up, so to speak, to see if it's something I can figure out is approved. Along that same line, I've mentioned drywall screws. you know, man, you see that bugle head on a screw with the Phillips head on it. Man, there are some of these that may be approved for attachments, usually not ledger board attachments, but some joist hanger attachments or some of the metal brackets attachments and stuff. But most of the time, you see that, and particularly black ones, you're looking at a drywall screw. I mean, the name drywall screw is your first clue that it's probably not for this use. And they don't have any shear strength. They're just not approved for this at all. See that done constantly. These would be wrong. Another, I think this is KBR2. Another one here, and you can see maybe in the camera there, got some embossments along the edge, and then you have the torque screw on it. This one is approved for also attaching joist hangers, screwing down the planks, things like that. And regarding putting on joist hangers and things, the nail prescriptions are 16 penny nails, but not sinker nails. Galvanized 16 penny nails, and you can see they're actually a different length, even though the sinker is considered 16 penny, but not sinkers because they rust and they're thinner. Actual framing 16 penny galvanized nail for that, and never the little Tico nails that once upon a time were approved, but no longer. And so these little 1.5-inch Tico nails, not approved for attaching joist hangers at all any longer for that. So a little bit of a essay, so to speak, on attachments. Any other questions there, Kayla?
I do, and they even have to do with attachments.
Good.
So the first one we'll go to is confirming his understanding. A 10-foot joist only needs 3 half bolts at 34 OC.
Yeah, crazy. I know. I when I'm looking at that chart, I'm like, are you kidding me? But that's what it says. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then let's see. The InterNACHI deck course shows lags or bolts must be 2 inches from the top edge of the ledger, but only 3/4 from the bottom. Did this change to 2 inches from top and bottom like your slide showed?
I honestly didn't catch that the InterNACHI showed that. My understanding is 2 inches from either edge. So I'd have to double check that. I've always used the 2-inch rule, top and bottom. That's a great question. Yeah.
I know that you and Lon, you and Ben had been going over some of those things in the course, and it's interesting to see that there's still a lot of difficulty in agreements, even when you're looking at code books, even when you're looking at standards of practice.
I like to say that code books are a little like the Bible. They're open to interpretation. And, I've seen, literally the city inspectors struggling with it and stuff. And one other thing to keep in mind about city, county inspectors, city inspectors and stuff. In fact, I had this happen on a fixer-upper I was doing a few years ago, where the city inspector, in this case, it was an electrical issue, and the city inspector tells my electrician, yeah, they have the NEC open, and my electrician's got his finger in the book going, see, I did it right. And the city inspector says, yes, you did, but we're going to do it my way. So knowing what your local inspectors like to see can help you out tremendously on this, where if you got a local inspector who just basically thinks that the code is going too far on something, and they're not calling it out, in my opinion, I'm just not going to knock my head against that wall. On the other hand, if I know the city inspector is going beyond code on something, then I know that's what the inspector is going to be looking for when I'm seeing the same thing, and I'm going to adjust my reports, my inspection, according to what I know the local guy or gal is calling out. So knowing what's going on with your local inspectors can help you out a lot. And frankly, I've called them up over the years and just had chats with them. And, sometimes they literally go, well, what do you think? And I'm like, well, okay, here's what I think. But most of the time I'm just learning how they're doing it. And I had one head city guy tell me it was for a suburb here in Denver called Aurora. And he says, here in Aurora, we like to use common sense when we apply the code. Well, great, but doesn't make my job any easier. So
Right.
understanding some of that stuff with your local inspectors can really make a big difference in you not getting a lot of phone calls about, you called this out, but the city says it's okay. Just, that's my 2 cents on that little subject.
Okay. 4 more questions, 2 of which are on nails, but I'll take us back to joists. So we have a question that asks, for double joists and double header, is there a proper fastening to look for on the construction of the double beams themselves?
Well, they don't necessarily, typically we see them nailed together with 16 penny nails. But really it's how they're attached on their ends that make the difference. But I have seen them bolted through. They're depending on the load they're carrying, there can be some prescriptions for that, but most of the time, nailed together properly with, like I said, 16 penny nails is considered, and spacing, every, 2 nails every 6 to 8 inches apart as you go up down the board. Generally, that's the kind of thing that I see inspectors around here wanting to see. I never, like next to never see a inspector pulling out a tape or counting fasteners and going, okay, this is, yeah, we're barely okay here or something. They generally go, okay, that looks okay, and then move on. And so if you don't see any attachments, the comment earlier about 34 inches apart on that, yeah, that one would, like, wow, I'm like, that's crazy. That's so different than what we used to do. I don't know, that one just, and the thing is, we don't even know if those are bolts or lags necessarily. Sometimes we might, but we don't always know whether it's a bolt or a lag. So man, if I see 34 inches apart on a new deck, I'm going to say, let's have a contractor confirm that this is actually compliant with our building practices, because that's amazing. That's so different than what we've done traditionally. And about the doubled up headers, if I don't, if I see 3 nails in it, I'm going to, this isn't looking quite right. We need a contractor to come out and do some work on this.
Okay. Speaking of lags, someone says, I see conflicting info on tension ties versus lags. Is there a general rule on if/when tension ties are required?
Yes. This was not 2021. It was prior to 2021. Was it 2018, I think? I can't remember exactly. And I'm coming up on that here in a minute. But yeah, they want the deck attached to the house better than just the ledger board lagged into the wall. I don't know if I have that coming up on here immediately I got some more over the siding slides here. So we'll be coming up on that here in just a few minutes,
Okay.
but yeah, there is for what I'm seeing around here. If the deck is only a couple of feet off the ground, I'm not seeing them require those tensioners. But boy, if it's 6 feet or more off the ground, I'm seeing them want them on every deck. So, but again, that's one of those things where it looks like, at least around here, individual city inspectors are kind of like, if the deck's going to fall only 12 inches to the ground, not as big a deal as the deck that's 6 feet or more off the ground. Is kind of seems to be a threshold that I'm seeing around here, just for whatever that's worth.
And then we have, I think we can do these last two questions. Someone wants to know, what about ledger lock bolts? I assume in terms of the bolt conversation that you just had.
I'm not 100% sure I know what you mean, but again, it's kind of what your local inspectors are approving, but generally speaking, those would be fine, I think. It just they tend to be, if we're talking about the same thing, they're approved by the manufacturers, I think. Again, if we're talking about the same thing. So generally, I think those would be allowed.
Okay. And then last, somebody wants to know, where in the IRC do you find that Tetco nails are no longer approved?
Oh, it doesn't say you can't use them. It prescribes it must be a 3.5-inch nail. That's the prescription. Must be a 3.5-inch nail, and I'd have to look, because, like I say, I'm not a code guy. But it doesn't say you can no longer use Ticos. It says nails have to be 3.5 inches.
Okay. Well, Joseph, I'm going to message you privately just to see if you have a question, so that Lon can take us on the rest of his presentation.
Cool. So in the illustration here, we have a cantilever attached, a deck attached to a cantilever. And sometimes the fix for this is, as I kind of added here to the InterNACHI illustration, is just adding a column underneath that ledger to attach it properly, bearing properly underneath the ledger there, and relieve that load from that the deck might be contributing to the ledger there. So that's often a simple fix for that. As home inspectors, we rarely are prescribing what the fix is, but just for your understanding that if you see somebody who's done that, I just added a column under there to the ledger, even though it may be still bolted through to the cantilever, to the rim joist of the cantilever, or floor band of the cantilever. They've added now a column that would bear the weight of that deck, and should relieve the extra tension that would be on the cantilever. So back to talking about our ledger must be flashed into the to the siding or whatever we have, but typically siding in our examples here, stucco, whatever. And of course, the ledger cannot be on top of the siding. Now, I have an illustration coming up here. We'll talk about this a little more, so I'll get to it in a second here. So no flashing. Oops, no flashing right here. Oops, this is going to be a problem, because water can get back in there. And even if it's not affecting our pressure treated ledger here, it can still be working mischief on the house side, going through the siding and into the framing of the house and causing issues back there. So it's really a big deal to have the deck ledger board flashed into the siding above it. So here's an example from showing attachment to a concrete wall. And in this case, just caulking a nice caulking bead, thick bead on the top of the ledger there, just to keep water from getting in there and possibly causing some issues with our ledger. And, arguably, we're in cold areas, maybe you might, depending on how the foundation here is, could have a freeze issue with water getting in there, maybe. But just best practice to caulk that if it's attached directly onto a concrete, like a foundation wall or something. Here in our example, you can have that ledger board attached over the sheathing here. So if you have 1/2-inch plywood, OSB, even gyp boards allowed, on top of the floor band here are the studs, if it's on against a stud wall. You can have that, but not on top of our siding. So it can be on that sheathing and then bolted through. And as I said earlier, if it's lags or bolts, either one, you should, if it's in a place where you can see both sides of it, you should see both ends. Obviously, one exception to that would be if they put that ledger against the frame, 2x6 or 2x4s, 2x6s, the studs, in other words, and lagged into those studs, we wouldn't be seeing anything on the inside there. But if it's on the floor band, then we should be able to see both sides of that. Unfinished basements, some crawl spaces, you can often see whether they lagged or bolted through the floor band like they were supposed to there. So as it says here in the 2021, it says it actually allows up to 1 inch of open space between the floor band and the ledger for the wall sheathing and stuff. And you can even put in stacked washers to give a space there to create that gap if they're doing it for drainage or some other reason. So it doesn't have to be directly to the framing. You can have that sheathing there, or even stacked washers behind there. I've never seen anybody do stacked washers. I've certainly seen it on top of sheathing a lot. So here's those tensioners we were talking about earlier. So this is, as I said, arguably for any deck, but around here, it looks like to me our city inspectors are making a bigger deal if it's a deck that if it failed, someone could get hurt. If it's only 2 feet off the ground, not very likely somebody's going to get much worse than a minor bruise if it fails. So maybe they're not as tough on this. But yeah, they want to see these tensioners. Here's an example, an illustration showing it going, both inside the house over here, then on the deck, and tying. It's usually a joist near the edge of the deck. It could be a rim joist on the edge, or usually the next joist over. Those are the typical places that we see it, and just basically really locks that deck up against the house, where that opportunity for it to pull away is like non-existent. And in our example here, you can see the flashing. This is Z flashing in this case, but underneath our siding here, then over the top of the ledger board, and then if somehow any water just gets drained over and can't get behind our ledger there in that. So, here's what one looks like. Added on the rim joist here on the last joist, and it goes completely through. into the basement in this case. And we have that same setup on the other side, and they just tighten it up, and it does really do a nice job locking it in and not just relying on our little angled nails here or screws to hold our deck on, basically. So they put this on each end of the deck. So typically, for unless it was some kind of really complex deck, simple deck, even if it's 20 feet long, but it's just simple deck on the back of a house, probably have two of these, one on each end of the deck, holding each end of the deck there. Interestingly, and this is one I saw just recently, this was a permitted deck, and the city inspector signed off on this attachment. I hadn't seen this one before, so I literally just added this slide like a week ago to this, just to show you something that was different and approved, at least by one of our inspectors here, for doing the same thing. They just lagged in to the floor band on the other side with this lag, just one lag, and then used simple nails here to attach the rest of the bracket here. But this was different, and apparently the crack wasn't an issue. The little countersunk here on the otherwise approved fasteners, but and apparently the city guy didn't call them out on that either. So here's an example of a different attachment. Looks different than certainly the IRC illustrations and other illustrations, but city inspector here said, yeah, that one's okay too. So sometimes you run into these things that are a little different, and and occasionally they're going to be okay with your local inspectors. This was just an illustration showing attachment to a block wall. Still got that beaded caulk. The different thing here is in our illustration here, using an epoxy anchor, filling in back here to anchor our bolts in behind the blocks. There's some other attachments that would be approved too, but this is one that's sometimes done. Obviously for us, all we would see is the head here of our 1/2-inch lag or bolt, or lag, really, it says bolt there, but I probably were talking about a lag going into the epoxy on the inside there. Again, I don't know, at least around here, this would be a rare construct, or something we rarely see. Just don't see a lot of decks attached to foundations around here, but if you do, just a little bit of information on how they, if you do around where you're at, then little information on how these are put together. Ledger strips, don't see this commonly done, but can be done, where they attach a board along the bottom edge of the ledger, and then the joist, instead of having to have a joist hanger, can rest on that ledger and be nailed or screwed through. Can be toe-nailed in, but it has to be bite into the wood nicely to be a toenail. And it's something like this. Look, there's no ledger or anything there. This is just strictly relying on the end nailing and the sheer strength of those nails or screws to hold it on. There should be a joist hanger here, just simple as that. They did do a nice job putting in their corner post here for the guardrail, lagging it in and stuff. So this is the new for 2021. This is going to be something we're going to see far more commonly, where it's goes the full width of the rim of the joist and is lagged or rather bolted through both sides here to really firm up those corner posts. We'll see a little more of that coming up. And again, just showing a basic attachment here. Typically we see staggered attachments with our lags or bolts. Nail pops. You call out nail pops, and we see them all the time. Interestingly, re-nailing them down almost never works, and also putting in screws here instead rarely works that well either. So these can sometimes be hard to truly fix, and putting a lag into the joist hanger here is not a replacement for filling all the nail holes with or fastener holes with approved fasteners. And then of course we have our joist is not fully bearing in the joist hanger here, which you see that one done wrong a lot. They typically, and part of it is, as you guys know, particularly as you get into larger boards, you get into 2x8s, 2x10s, the reliability of them all being exactly the same width or same dimensions is low. So you might have a 2x10, one that's 9.5 inches thick, and then literally the next one's 9 3/8 or even 9 1/4. Well, where do you want it flush? On the top or the bottom? Well, we really want it flush on the top, so the top of our deck is nice and flat. So they'll have these gaps in the bottom here. Well, they're supposed to shim that, and most city inspectors want to see a metal shim in there and not a wood shim. If I see somebody took wood shims and shoved them in there and they're working, okay, cool, they're working. But typically we do metal shims because they don't compress. So you shouldn't have that gap there. And this, also this bracket or joist hanger here, it probably isn't the correct size. This is an old photo of mine and I don't remember the dimensions on it, but chances are they should have used the next size up joist hanger, which would have been closer up here. So sometimes you see, 2x4 joist hangers used to hold or support 2x8 joists or 2x10 joists. Well, that's not right. Something you would call out. And look, you see this kind of goofiness. First of all, you should have at least certainly no more than 1/8 of an inch gap between the butt or the end of the joist and the ledger or the rim joist. But this, what good did that do? Well, nothing there. So improper nailing here, got a nail pot there. He used a hole there that wasn't even rated for a nail. He just sticking something in there. Yeah, not can't do that. That's not working. That's not performing. And then again, poorly nailed. It's bent out here. Just some sloppy work here. Poor workmanship, may not be working. I make comments on this that okay, it's not immediately failing, but this is poor workmanship and might have trouble in the future. Again, some nail pops. This one isn't too bad, but nail pops, so we're still going to call that out. Then, okay, yeah, nice approved fasteners here, except he didn't catch the wood. It just went right in on the edge here. Oops, not too good. Here you can see that 1/2 inch lag, top of the 1/2 inch lags here. That part looks great. But in our examples here, and not so good in actual workmanship on putting this joist, hanging this joist here. And this screw maybe bit some wood, but this one barely, and that one for practical purposes, not at all. You cannot screw or nail in to end grain. So not allowed, even 3.5 inch, 4 inch screws, doesn't matter. You can't go into end grain. Now, you know, look, you're only 2 feet off the ground here, so where's it going to go? But that's not the, you know, that's literally not the point. And then they did something else. They took a bracket that was intended for different use, and they straightened it out. So they, as it says over here, metal hanger has been bent or hammered to a shape that it was not intended to be. So this violates the manufacturer's instructions, because manufacturers never say, oh, you can hammer the bracket to any shape you want. And so multiple violations here. Looks like a likely drywall screw there. Now these screws may be approved for some sort of construction use, but you know, the straightening out the bracket, some fasteners may not be. You can't go into the end grain. This screw has come completely through, so it's not doing much. Then we have screws that are bearing the load. These, you know, unless they're rated for this use, and they're probably not rated for this use. They may be deck screws for putting the planks down, but for bearing loads, almost certainly they weren't approved. So we got multiple things, do-it-yourselfer bill here. And over here, you know, a little goofiness here, but once again in the end grain, which and they bent this bracket off joist hanger here. They bent it straight to accommodate the end grain on the ledger board, which, oh, they didn't flash the ledger board in, and it's over the siding. Multiple things wrong here. So, you know, many things to call out here. Or you can just simplify it and say, you know, substandard work, poor workmanship, you know, may fail because of poor workmanship, something like that. And then you get, you know, just using some brackets that were never intended for this use, and almost certainly drywall screws. So a combination of things there. So just wrong, just wrong.
Lon, can you use PVC shims?
I'm sorry?
Can you use PVC shims?
PVC shims?
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen that done. You know, probably so. They wouldn't compress. That would probably work. I got to say, I've never seen anybody do that, but that could work. Yeah, that could work, I would think. Yeah, interesting question. So you cannot attach that ledger board to brick veneer either. So as you know, brick veneer, not load bearing, not structural. It's just, you know, pretty. So, and stone veneer, ditto. So once again, you cannot attach ledger boards over the top of brick or stone veneer. Now, if you have a structural brick wall, and certainly, you know, many older homes will have, you know, masonry construction, double width bricks that's all structural. Well, that's a different matter, and you know, still has to be attached in some approved manner. But those can be allowed. But if it's veneer, oops, can't do that one either. So this illustration kind of shows us sort of the whole putting everything together kind of thing. So we have our you know, wall covering here. We have some sheathing here. We have our flashing between the sheathing and our covering here. And then maybe has water resistant barrier. This yellow here is maybe our WRB or some sort of underlayment that is also over the top of the flashing. So you might see that. And so we have the flashing coming over our ledger here. And then we also have in this example, flashing on the bottom edge of the ledger. Now, you guys may have noticed in none of my photos do I show ledger flashing under the ledger. As far as it's certainly around here, but that is, as far as I can tell, just about anywhere, that is not a requirement. That would certainly be a best practice kind of thing that, you know, is a little extra, but typically not required. So good practice, but not a requirement to have that bottom piece of flashing. I mean, the obvious reason is if you got the water diverted up here and over the top, then you just shouldn't be getting water down in this little, you know, few inches of ledger here that needs to be diverted out. So typically, under most circumstances, this piece of flashing here is not going to be a requirement, but certainly would be a best practice if it had it. So flashing. Now, a lot of our examples show Z flashing. I almost never see Z flashing. I think for the obvious reason that it's hard to get it to sit on top of the joists well. So I typically see L flashing. And so here we have a good example of L flashing here on the ledger, which is attached to the framing. Bolts on top and bottom are more than 2 inches from the edge. I mean, this is, you know, pretty good here. This one's an interesting one. Here we have roofing felt that they used for flashing. And, you know, typically this would not be an approved use. The backstory on this one is that they had a dog that was peeing on the house wall up here, and the acidity in the dog's urine had dissolved the flashing. So when they did a deck repair, they had this bright idea of using roofing felt that the dog's urine wouldn't attack, and do that instead, which yeah, clever, but no. You know, they could have done the flashing and then maybe the felt on top of the flashing, or you know, maybe something like Tyvek or something on top of that flashing to protect it from the urine, but they still needed the metal flashing here. So this was not an approved, or normally I don't think a city inspector would have ever approved this. They as just being the only flashing over the ledger board there, but kind of a funny backstory on it to me. Get past that. So talking about cantilevers on decks. So you know, the math on this is this length of 4 times the length, 1/4 the length here, basically. So let's say we have a 2 by 12 joist, then the cantilever could go out 36 inches, 1/4 the length by 3 times the width of the 12-inch joist. So, you know, we're not required to do this math. You know, typically you don't see bad cantilevers because of that. Now, this is going back the old way. Under the new 2021 IRC, that L4, that 1/4 of the length of the overall joist is not the requirement. It has literally a graph or a chart on that. Another example of that, here's the chart showing how to do that. So now under 2021, they actually give us a chart to do it, so you don't have to figure out any math, although in this particular example here, the old L4 rule still works. But so assuming you have a spruce joist, 2 by 10 in our example, 16-inch spacing. We'll do our math here. So we have, let's be conservative, round down from 13 feet 7 inches to 12 feet. So that's the overall length of the joist here. So we have a 12-foot joist. The maximum cantilever is 3 feet. So it's still the same, L4 rule. So, 36 inches, pretty big cantilever for most decks. And, you see that, you kind of, unless, 2x12s, generally you're going to say, yeah, we're okay. You see something goofy like this, it just jumps at you like, oh, no, 4 or 5 feet, way too far, wrong. Cool with the I-beam there. But nope, way too much. Big call out, wrong. Interesting do-it-yourselfer work there. So decks greater than 6 feet above the grade need to have diagonal bracing. Typically, if you walk on the deck and it shimmies like some jelly, then you need bracing. But if it's more than 6 feet off the grade, it's still supposed to have some bracing here, regardless of how the deck feels, so to speak. And also should have a diagonal brace going across there to help stabilize it too. So a couple of things there that we would look for in a in a well-built deck is having some cross bracing on our joists, to our rim joists, to our columns, and then this diagonal brace across there that stabilizes the deck also. Then just one of those little inspector tricks that some will do to make sure the bolt is actually tight. You tap on it with a hammer and you get that solid ring telling you it's all solid, connected and tight. If you get that kind of dull, sort of almost a thud, then it tells you it's loose. So it's kind of a little quick clue to tell how tight the fasteners are. And of course, oops, no washer there. It's wrong. It's got to have a washer on it. Got to be flush on the surface of the board, the ledger in this case. So yeah, oops, wrong. Looks like they may have used some screws that were approved for this use here, but wrong here on the ledger attachment. And it doesn't look like much flashing there either. Whoops. Oh, here we go. Then cracking. Most cracks, frankly, aren't that big a deal. They just don't seriously affect the overall strength of the board. But occasionally, like this stringer here on this stairs, this stringer is coming apart. And the interesting thing is this was also pressure treated lumber. It just simply did not hold up. And this stringer here is coming apart. So you see this kind of cracking, oops, we got an issue. But some cracking like this almost never is a call out. Are there complaints with maybe some nail pops and things, and maybe the wrong kind of bracket used here? But the big issue here would be the nail pops and not the cracks. So again, typical crack, another typical crack, just rarely going to be a big issue. Yeah, just rarely. Now, if we see them, sometimes you'll get a board where the grain doesn't run completely through the board and the grain will cut to the edge and the cracks will follow that grain to the edge. Now that can be an issue. I don't think I have a photograph of that, but I've seen it on on rare occasions, and it's typically just one joist or on a deck or a floor framing or something where however the board was cut from the tree, the grain is running to the edge of the board instead of going straight through the length of the board. And we've had a split, crack follow that grain to the edge and create fairly weak or almost like it's a cut board going through. So something like that would be something you'd be more prone to calling out than these type of just horizontal cracks here that even if they're going through, typically aren't going to be a big issue. So guardrails and supports. Obviously, the other part of a deck that's important is the guardrail. We don't want people with their fourth beer leaning against the guardrail too heavily and getting a bruise on their noggin as they go over. So minimum height, 36 inches off the top of the deck. So this one shows, the illustration here shows the guardrail supported strictly with balusters, sometimes called spindles, both terms are used. The guardrails should have a 4x4 post, minimum 4x4, every 6 feet to secure it, give it some lateral strength. Commercial code, by the way, is 42 inches for commercial buildings, but for residential, 36-inch minimum height. So here is the new part of the new code for attaching the corner column, corner post or column of the guardrail. The only thing that's kind of wrong with this one is that column, the bottom of it should be flush with the joist of the ledger here in the bottom of the joist. So under true 2021 guidelines, this would technically be wrong because it's not flush with the bottom of the joist here, but this would otherwise be a very good attachment pre-2021 here. So it's trying to, as best as they can, have that continuous load path. And so, yeah, they're relying on 1/2-inch lags here, but tremendous shear strength on these, so it works. But they like a little more bearing on this for the leverage effect of pushing on that guardrail. If you have this corner column coming all the way through here, it leverages better or distributes that leverage pressure, fulcrum pressure, more over this space, or better over this space than when it's a couple inches short. So another way to attach it is with a proved bracket, lagged or rather bolted through the, so this would be like not on a true, necessarily always on a corner, but like out in the span of the deck, you have that, 6 feet away from the corner, for instance. You have your 4x4 column there that's supporting the guardrail up here and giving it that lateral strength. And so we're using approved brackets that both fasten into the joist and then bolt through our rim joist and through our column here to really secure this column into the framing of both the rim joist and the joist here to give it tremendous lateral strength here when it's pushed. So that leverage, that guardrail should resist 200 pounds of force down or out and down. So pushing down and out. The old pre-2021 code was resist 200 pounds of push in any direction. So if you're pulling or pushing on it, it had to be relatively stable with 200 pounds of push. But the code, using a little common sense, goes, we're not too worried about somebody falling backwards onto the deck. We don't want them to fall forwards off of a 10-foot deck. So now they changed that to resist 200 pounds of outward push on that. Now look, for us as home inspectors, you know, how do you get 200 pounds of push? You know, I'm like, what, 165, 70 pounds, you know, kind of thing. You know, I'm going to grab hold of that guardrail and I'm just going to give it a good hard shove. If it feels solid, I'm good. If I feel like, oh, crap, I might go through this if I hit it a little harder. Now I'm not good. Now I'm going to call it out. So it's just a matter of little subjectivity for us as home inspectors, rather than trying to put some sort of actual measurement pulley system or something on there that would actually truly exert 200 pounds of pressure. But you can kind of appreciate that on a 36-inch guardrail, putting 200 pounds of force on the top of that rail at the fulcrum point at the bottom, that's 1,700 pounds of force down there on the bottom. So through the, you know, the magic of leverage, you have tremendous force down there on the bottom of that guardrail. And so this attachment at the bottom is really a big deal on any deck. And, you know, so often you grab that guardrail and you see the whole rim joist just rolling with the guardrail. And yeah, okay, it's resisting 200 pounds of force there and stuff, but it, you know, still could use something like these brackets to firm it up and make it much more stable and get some of that, you know, sloppiness out of it. It's a subjective call, in my opinion. You know, if you feel secure pushing on it, I'm not going to call it out. If I feel like I might, yeah, this one might be something I could go through, now I'm going to call it out. That's kind of the way I treat that. Interesting little thing, top of the balusters here need to be beveled so that rain will run off of them. If they're flat, then rain can sit up in here, wick down into the end grain, and possibly promote wood rot down there in the top of that baluster. So we want to see angles, cuts on the top that will drain water off. This illustration here, ignore this part over here. That's not right. About 30, top of the guardrail being 36 inches above the bench. So ignore that part. The part of this illustration that I want to use here is this part down here. So one of the rules, the top of the deck, if it's 36 inches above the grade within, if it's 30, I said that wrong. If it's 30 inches from the top of the deck to the grade, 30 inches, 30, from the top of the deck to the grade, within 36 inches of the edge of the deck, we need a guardrail. So on a slope like this, if 36 inches, 3 feet away from the deck, were greater than 30 inches to the edge of the grade here, then must have a guardrail. So this is one of these things, and this is true for porches. I was just early, like Monday of this week, I was on a porch where this rule kicked in on the end of the porch, because we were only about 20 inches right here, but by the time I got out 36 inches, I was actually over 30 inches. It was like 32 inches out here, and so the end of that porch needed a guardrail added to it. So just one of these little things that you kind of look for when you see a deck that's off the ground a fair distance, and you start to go, oh, okay, right here I'm 24 inches, so no problem, at least under code guidelines. But as I get 36 inches away, now I'm greater than I'm 30 or greater from the top of the deck, and now that kicks in the rule that we need a guardrail here. So little something to look forward to. One last thing, not last thing, but one more thing with the 2021 code change is no longer can 4x4s be notched at all. They can't be notched, period. So this used to be acceptable, no longer acceptable. So we're talking about grandfathering earlier. You see this on older decks constantly. So for us as inspectors, is it secure? I grab that guardrail. If it's secure, even though it's a notched 4x4 column or post, I'm cool, I'm good, I'm moving on. If it's sloppy, doesn't feel safe, now we got a problem, now we call it out. Interestingly, that 4x4 can be turned, it could be, have some fluting on it or something. And possibly, and if again, local inspector approved that, it could still be approved. But for a standard 4x4 column, no notching, full 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches around it, new code for any new decks you see. And then you all know about the spacing on anything built in the last 15, 16 years. Can't remember the exact code change. A 4-inch gap, no more than a 4-inch gap between the balusters. I don't, you can buy spheres for doing this, but most of us will just put our tape on it or use your fist if you measure the width of your fist, if that works for you. 4-inch baluster, same here off the bottom, 4-inch, no more than a 4-inch gap there on that. This has become really popular, horizontal balusters, and often steel cables used for doing this. And city inspectors are signing off on it. Look, at the city inspector signing off on it, great, but what a crummy idea, because kids and silly adults can certainly climb over these now. So this is a climbable situation, which normally wouldn't have not been approved in the past, but this is a place where local inspectors, at least certainly around here, but I'm hearing it from other inspectors around the country, so I'm thinking it's probably going to be true for you in New York and most of your places in New York, that your local inspectors are going to let them do this because people want it. They love the look. They like these horizontal balusters or cables or whatever they're doing there, and they're going to allow it. So I make a note that guardrail is climbable and move on. Made a note that it was observable. My client asked me about it and say, well, your 4-year-old kid can climb right over that guardrail. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, but people like it. Little thing, this is from the NADRA deck evaluation, we're talking about the Tico nails. Here's straight out of this is their illustrations, actually, the NADRA illustrations. That short nails not allowed for uses, must be full length 16 penny nails for attachments. On our handrails going upstairs, we want that height 34 to 38 inches. You see this, from part of the way off the nosing of the step, by the way. So it's off the nosing of the step. Measurement when you measure it. But part of it will be 40 inches, part of it will be 32, and then some of it's right. Well, it's wrong. You call it out. The 34 to 38 inches height is the proper height. So just one of those things that in ramps longer than 6 feet have to have handrails too. And by the way, a handrail is required on 5 or more risers. Here's the riser, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this one would require, if we had a fifth here, would require a handrail. For 4, not required if this was the wall here, it wouldn't be required. Our just a little thing about the decking. This is one of those little rules that may not be on the top of your head, and if it's 8 inches past that last girder beam here, not the end of the world, but nevertheless, that maximum end there, say butting up to a chimney here or going around a chimney here, so they didn't run their rim joist right to the edge. So we have a little bit of decking overhang here. So 6 inches is the maximum typically for that overhang. If they did further, if it's solid, good. If it's not, you're going to call it out. Simple as that. But in my opinion, and then of course 1/2 inch lags and stuff. Should have an 1/8 inch gap. The requirement for this rule, I'm not sure what the reasoning is. Back when I was in construction doing decks and things, my boss told me it was so, we want no more than 1/8 of an inch here, because women wearing high heels with the heel only 1/4 inch wide could slip through the plank on wider gap. I doubt that that has anything to do with the rule, but it just sort of tells you something about, some of the thinking in the past. In any event, 1/8 inch gap is what we like to see here. We want some gap for water and debris to fall through, but not so wide that, other things could go through it. Well, I guess like a woman wearing high heel shoes, having a shoe go through or something, maybe, I think the argument there that you saw about puddles forming makes more sense. Deck planking should be staggered. You shouldn't have the butt joints in a straight line. It creates weak places, or rather, it strengthens the deck when our planks, the butt joints, don't they break on different joists. So we don't want that same break on the same joist in a straight line. It's just stronger, makes the deck more solid if they break at different places on there. In our example here, it should span at least, a plank should span at least 4 joists, and that shouldn't be just across 2. So in our example here, this would be both of these would be bad practice. We want preferably 1, 2, 3, 4 joists to be spanned by our planks. Carpet, holds water, can degrade the wood. I'll write up that I can't see the condition of the planking because it's got carpet on the decking. Now, if the carpet's loose, you can pick it up and see what's going on. But if they use indoor or outdoor carpet that's glued down or something, it's just stuck down. You don't know. But if you can see underneath over and over, high likelihood you're going to see a problem underneath because moisture being trapped by the carpet. And then no nails or screw pops. They used a nice deck screw here to put the planks down, but we got big dogs, and this is in front of the slider into the bedroom. So apparently they let their dogs come and go from that bedroom through here. And the dogs have worn down the wood right there, creating effectively a nail pop. So that's something that someone could snag their, if they come out barefoot or something, or depending on what they're wearing, could snag on that, call it out. Whatever the reason for a nail pop or screw pop, doesn't matter. Whether the wood has been worn down past it, like in this case, by years of dogs running on it, or just the nail working its way up, call it out. No nail or screw pops. And another one. So on the stringers, this is the throat right here. That is a 5-inch minimum width for that. It can be overcome by doubling up stringers with a thinner throat, but that is kind of an engineering decision. So in general, for our purposes, we're looking for at least 5 inches here. I don't see this one violated a lot, but boy, it jumps at you when you see it. And so I've certainly written it up over the years several times. And that, again, they took a bracket and bent it to a use that it was not designed for. And so this bracket was not intended to secure the stringer to our rim joist here. And they just made one work that wasn't designed for this, and used, those don't look like approved screws there either. And they didn't fill all the available screw holes or nail holes. So multiple things here not done right. We got 5 minutes left, and we're near the end of this anyway. You want to, Kayla, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Any questions at the end here?
I did walk away to feed. I did walk away to feed the animals. I just want to confirm that we talked about how the stairs are attached to the deck.
Yes.
Okay, then there are no questions.
Cool. Well, we've kind of covered. I mean, I got a few more things here, but we definitely covered just about all of it. You can use some cleats to attach treads, or you can put them into the stringers, put them on top like this. But once again, you shouldn't have more than a 4-inch gap here too for silly babies crawling through. There's some other rules like that. Minimum tread depth, this width here should be 10 inches, and riser height is a maximum 7 3/4 inches, and this is true for stairs anywhere, with no more than a 3/8 inch variance between the steps, because that creates a trip hazard. Keep in mind, this will be the last thing I say. This is true for stairs anyway. When we pick our foot up for that first step, our brain immediately programs our next foot for the next step, thinking it's the same height. If we have more than a 3/8 inch variance in the height of those steps, it becomes a trip hazard. And so I'm not measuring steps to get that example, but when I'm going up some stairs and I trip on a tread, I'll stop instantly and go, okay, normally I don't do that. And I'll pull out my tape and check it. And most of the time, I'm going to have a variance of more than 3/8 of an inch, and it created that trip hazard. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will wrap it up with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have one thing, Lon. Where would someone want to look to know what a good stair connection would be? It seems like you showed a lot of good examples of bad. Should they talk to their local code? Should they go to the IRC code book?
Yeah, the IRC gives a couple of examples of things, but the most common good way of doing it is getting metal banding. Typically at least a 1/16 of an inch metal banding. And so it's 1.5 inches wide, 1/16 of an inch or so thick. And it comes in rolls, or you can buy them in strips too. And, and it's already perforated, so it already has screw holes in it. And, secures to the floor band or the deck, and to the ledge, to the stringer. And man, I've seen these like 2 feet long where they run them down the bottom of the stringer or something. That is the best attachment that I see done, and simple and easy, and applies to so many decks. I mean, it's one that will work very commonly for decks. I do find that joist hangers are not made for that as a rule, because they have a square bottom. And so you got that stringer sitting there at an angle with this square, with the bottom that's not, of the joist hanger that's not angled for that. And so you'll see joist hangers, they try to make a joist hanger work for that, and it just never works right. But using that metal band that just straps the two together works great, typically, and is, at least certainly around here, is always approved.
Okay, well, that is, I think, the end of the questions. We're getting a number of people thanking you and I for our time. Thank you all for being here. InterNACHI would be nothing without its members. And really, frankly, our members told us that you wanted New York CE. And so that's what Nick and Ben gave me as my mission. So I'm really glad that we have started this. Yes, we do intend on having more webinars, New York State approved, as many states as we can have. There's some funny rules right now as we transition out of the pandemic into whatever the new normal is. But we will be doing more of these. I don't have a next date for y'all, but if you just watch, nachi.org/webinars. They're always posted there. That's where you can register. And very, very important last thing before we go. If you are here because you want New York State credit, I have to know what your name is and your license number. I'm going to once again put my number in the chat as well as my email. And I will tell everyone here in case you want to write it down, because I know some people are more comfortable that way. But please, 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 in the next, as soon as you can, tonight, but at the very latest tomorrow, text me at 303-367-2283 or email me at my name, Kayla, Kaela, at internachi.org. Give me your name that's on your license and your number, and I will make sure you get credits. If you do not get a confirmation text or email from me, follow up. I have to submit these within 15 days of today. My goal is 72 hours, and I think that's very achievable. But you should hear back that I have seen your license number and name. If you haven't seen that, reach out again. If you forget tomorrow what my number is or my email, it doesn't matter. Call our main line at InterNACHI. You can get to me. But I think with that, the last thing I want to say is, Lon, thank you so, so much for sharing your experience with us. I'm going to give myself the CE credits on my InterNACHI dashboard because I learned a lot.
Cool.
And I'm going to go out and look at my deck, which I encourage all of us to go do, especially with it fresh in our mind. You're going to see a lot of examples of things that you didn't see here, but hopefully you'll be able to go, that doesn't feel right. It doesn't pass the sniff test, and think about how you'd write up your own deck. No pressure. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm already getting more texts. Keep them coming. And otherwise, have a great evening. I will see you at the next round.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.